And now it's time for the Fleet Dynamic Dialogue. Would you please welcome our moderator, the Senior Vice President of Policy and Business Strategy at C2ES, Janet Peace.
So I am very excited to be moderating this panel. You know, this morning we heard about the importance of stories, and we had a lot of success stories, I thought. And in this next session, we're going to talk about fleets. And we've got four folks who know a lot about what's going on the ground. But we're going to do this next session just a little bit different. You know, jazz it up a little bit after lunch. We've got four speakers, and we're going to do it kind of a dynamic dialogue is what we're calling it. So each of our speakers, not only do they get to speak, they also get to be the interviewer. So let me get this started. I'll call out our first guest, Tom Day. He's the Chief Sustainability Officer for the Postal Service. Tom? So we're standing in the back, and everybody has got questions for Tom. This is great. But we only have 5 minutes for each one of these little interviews, and then we're going to have a bell go off, and then Tom will take my job. So, Tom, everybody's asking you, what's going on with fleets in the Postal Service?
Well, let me just lay the basic groundwork. The Postal Service has one of the largest civilian fleets, not as big as DoD, in the United States. We have roughly 210,000 vehicles. The big issue that we're dealing with right now is, for the last several years, as we've done our annual sustainability report, our fuel consumption's gone up. We have an aging fleet, and it's mostly our delivery fleet, that iconic vehicle you see out there, that unique little shape. There's roughly 180,000 of them, and we bought most of them between 1988 and 1993. That's a almost 25-year-old fleet on average, and the fuel economy is not so good. So here's the issue. I have really more questions for you, and that's why people are talking to me with different ideas. We've got this fleet out there that we need to replace, and we've reached out to the industry, the auto industry, as well as people within the federal government. We've talked to the Council on Environmental Quality, the DOE, the GSA to get advice. Because here's our challenge. We've put the request for information, we're about to issue a request for proposal to replace this fleet. But how do we do it? How do we take into account the differing technologies that are out there? And how do we do it over a time frame? One of the things about our fleet is it's somewhat unique operationally. There are 180,000 of them out there, but the unique aspect, probably the most noticeable, is we have right-hand drives. So that's not something you just go and buy. And we've also looked into, you just don't go to England or Japan and get their right-hand drives. That doesn't work either. So we need something unique, somewhat customized. And the time frame we're kind of looking at now is that we're talking to the industry, we're looking to get prototypes. We'll probably test them through 2016 into 2017, and then make a decision about what we want to buy and give the manufacturer the time to ramp up. So rough estimate, we'll probably start deployment of this new fleet 2018. We think, talking to the industry, they might be able to produce 25, 30, maybe 40,000 a year. It's going to take 5 to 7 years to replace it. So if you map that all out, you're talking 2018 to 2023, maybe as late as 2025. Now put that in the context of a rapidly changing technology, pool of technology, that might power those vehicles. So what do we do? How do we make sure that we're making good decisions up front? Because we don't want to go buy 100 or make a commitment to buy 180,000 of X only to find out that technology Y is really the better thing to do. We had in the past done a one-size-fits-all. Literally, when we bought what we call the long life vehicle back in 88 to 93, we bought exactly the same thing, and whether it was deployed in Fairbanks, Alaska or Key West, Florida, it was the same vehicle. We're a little more open now to give thought to a little more regionality to it, to understand the geography and the impact of climate. It is a little different between Key West and Fairbanks, but also to understand the difference in technology, because it's not just what goes under the hood, what that powertrain is going to be, but is there an infrastructure to support it? So whether it's electric with electric charging stations, CNG with fueling stations, all those different permutations that we're considering, what's out there, what's available, and keeping our acquisition strategy flexible enough that if a significant improvement were to occur in the next couple of years, that we're flexible enough to say, okay, we bought the first 50,000 of these, but now this technology is ready and the infrastructure is there to support it. Can we switch over to something else?
You've got a big challenge.
Yes, we do have a challenge.
It's no doubt. And infrastructure, you know, it's the chicken or the egg problem. You know, you bring the cars on, does the infrastructure follow? You got a big challenge, but I think you're not the only one who's got fleets. So when you think about this, what kind of lessons would you suggest at this point? You have a lot of questions, but you've been thinking about this for a while. So what kind of lessons would you share in your thought process so far?
Well, the lessons we're seeing is, I'll use CNG as an example. We had a history of using a lot of CNG in the 90s, and by a lot I would say about 5,000. We did some retrofits on our existing fleet and upgraded it to be CNG vehicles. A couple of things happened. One, the infrastructure wasn't necessarily there to support it. It didn't sustain. And then the second part was, the other part that didn't sustain was the companies that built the retrofits went out of business. We couldn't get replacement parts.
The natural gas prices are a lot lower now, though.
Well, and natural gas is enticing. We still have a couple hundred in the fleet. We know it works. But the infrastructure is part of the problem. I think one of the things we've seen, we've talked to both government as well as private sector organizations, there's a lot of different people trying things like CNG, and I'm just using that as an example because that by no means would be the only way. All right.
What? Off to
It is
you.
end of round one.
End of round one. It's kind of like speed dating.
Okay, now I become the interviewer. Let me introduce Kevin Vincent. Kevin is the Chief Counsel at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. However, he is here on behalf of the Department of Transportation. So Kevin, what is... Could you explain the role? What is it that the Department of Transportation is doing to make the federal fleet greener?
Thanks, Tom. One of the previous panelists made the witty and wise observation that regulation is the mother of all invention. And I'm not sure really what goes on in all the research labs in the automobile industry and the trucking industry, but we do know at the Department of Transportation that regulation is what will motivate the inventions to get out of the research lab and onto the road. So what we have done at the Department of Transportation in conjunction with the EPA is issue the regulations that is making not just the federal fleet, but all fleets, all vehicles that are being manufactured now under the Obama administration. There have been major improvements in the fuel efficiency of those vehicles through our corporate average fuel economy, CAFE regulations. So the highest profile one were the ones a few years back for the light duty vehicles for cars and smaller trucks, where we have doubled the fuel efficiency of cars by 2025. There will be a doubling of how much fuel economy you get in your vehicles through those regulations. And that has led to major savings in greenhouse gas emissions from all automobiles that are produced. 6 billion metric tons of greenhouse gases will be avoided because of those improvements in fuel economy, which are coming from the CAFE regulations. And it's not just cars and light trucks, it is also the heavier vehicles. We issued for the first time ever under the Obama administration, the Department of Transportation, again in conjunction with EPA, issued regulations for medium and heavy duty trucks, improving the fuel economy of trucks and all the way from medium duty pickup trucks to 18-wheelers. And those regulations came out. That's going to result in 270 million metric tons of greenhouse gases that are saved. And that's equivalent to, I think it's 530 million barrels of oil that will be saved by not burning the fuel with future vehicles. And that's for the years 2014 through 2018. We are about to come out with new regulations. They're in final interagency review right now for the next round of truck rules, which will get even further improvements. So the biggest thing that we have done at the Department of Transportation is make all vehicles greener to improve fuel economy across the board. But there are specific things embedded within those regulations that are serving as an incentive for all fuel vehicles in particular to make it a very good compliance option for manufacturers to achieve fuel efficiency. So there are specific incentives for electric vehicles. There are specific incentives for natural gas vehicles is included in there. We have all sorts of incentives for biofuels that are in there. So all fuels will become a viable option to achieve fuel economy going forward in the future and present right now. So you will see these inventions coming out of the lab and onto our roads as a way of saving our future through combating climate change. So we're very proud of what we've done there, affecting the entire fleet, but we also have our own fleet at DOT. Just like all the other federal agencies, we are not just regulators, we are consumers of the vehicles that are subject to our regulation. And as part of our acquisition of vehicles, we, like most federal agencies, most of our vehicles are actually GSA vehicles. And through GSA, we have been making sure we are getting greener and greener vehicles at all times. When you pull into the DOT garage right now today, the first thing that you do is you drive past 5 plug-in vehicles that have been acquired through GSA, and those are the sedans we use to drive around in DOT to go to from DOT to go to meetings around Capitol Hill and then at the White House around town. So we are making sure our own footprint with our own fleet is also greener. And that's not just through the EVs, it's through across the board the vehicles we are acquiring are getting better fuel economy. And again, that's not something unique to DOT, that's something GSA is doing, but as consumers, each agency is obligated to, and we make sure at DOT that we lead by example to try to make sure that our vehicles are getting the best fuel economy for the American public.
Let me ask this. I mean, we're doing a lot through regulation. Is there any sign that the industry, the generic auto industry, is trying to get ahead of just being regulated and understanding that there's value to do this, there's financial value, environmental value? I
think we're seeing among a lot of the auto industry that fuel economy sells. I mean, that's nothing new. It's been touted for years by the auto industry, but it's not just marketing, it's actually investments that they're doing. So it's a combination of investing for compliance, but it's also a combination of investing for future markets and present markets that they want to tap into, which we like that.
Round 2.
Okay, so we switch sides again?
Yes, we do.
Thank you, Tom. So now I get to introduce Bob Graham. Bob Graham's with the Department of Energy, and he is the head of the EV Everywhere Challenge from the Department of Energy. And the question I want to ask you, Bob, is what is the EV Everywhere Challenge?
Janet told me I had to stand really close to this guy because...
Okay. So, all right, we'll stand here. All right. So, the EV Everywhere Challenge, tell us what it is and tell us what it does.
Okay, well, thank you all. Nice to be here for this is my 14th day in the federal government, so I'm a real expert, as you might know. So I even unretired from Southern California, where I worked at Southern California Edison, at the request of the DOE to come back and run the EV Everywhere program. EV Everywhere is the challenge, been around since 2012. The goal is to reduce the price of electric vehicles, get information out the door, let people know about it, and it really isn't happening. And so I was asked to spend the next 18 months to figure that out. And so our goal is really simple, is to figure out an information campaign will attract people to EV Everywhere, is to expand EV Everywhere to be fleets, goods and people movement, so everything from forklifts to baggage tugs in airports. It's going to expand to all electric vehicles, to get the information out that we need to make sure that people can make a wise decision how to buy those vehicles, and even more importantly, to develop the information to decide how much infrastructure is really needed to support the marketplace so that cities and communities and workplaces do not overbuild, but build correctly in order to meet the market's needs.
So how much do you think existing infrastructure will support expansion of EVs?
Since 95% of the charging is done at home, we have sufficient infrastructure and electricity grid to support every vehicle you can think about buying. And then there's about 30% of the charging is done at workplace. And we're beginning to develop workplace charging, which I think we'll talk about a little bit. And then ultimately there'll be some public charging. But what we find out is that people use public charging a lot initially, but later they back off because they don't have range anxiety into the future. And those that have plug-in hybrid electric vehicles don't even think about it. Like I have a plug-in hybrid vehicle and a Volt, and I drive it all over Los Angeles. Well, actually, right now it's in Falls Church, but I drove it all over Los Angeles. All my friends with better electric vehicles knew where every charge station in the area was. I don't know where any are because I don't need that. So we need to get that information out to the marketplace and know the difference between vehicles so they buy the right vehicle for the right usage, and that's what we're working on.
So me too, I plug up at home and can get to work and get back, but what about the folks that need to be able to plug up at work? Is the EV Everywhere Challenge applying to that?
We have an EV Workplace Challenge, which has over 300 companies signed up. Some a lot, like General Motors has, of course, they build the Volt, has charging stations in about 20 different locations. At Southern California Edison, we had them in 8 different locations. It's not enough, because it's the ideal location is charging. And why it's really interesting, because earlier people were talking about solar in the discussions. If you charge at work and you allow the utility to manage that charging so they can use all this electricity that's available from solar charging during the afternoon, it's better not only for the utility, it's better for all ratepayers. So the answer is workplace charging is extremely important.
How does that apply to the federal workforce?
It was one of the biggest surprises I had when I arrived, and like the second day. I said, well, great, how many government places are charging? And the answer was, hardly any. And I said, why not? Because they're not approved to charge at workplace charging in government facilities. So it's a major initiative by the DOE now. I understand by yourself, you've been working on it for a number of years, and actually you were telling me in the back that there's an executive order today that begins to allow government locations to begin to charge. And I think that's interesting for another reason. I believe if we get government facilities and parking lots having charge stations for employees, then we can use those same charging stations at nighttime for people who live in multifamily dwellings or low-income areas that can charge in those same locations. So I think there's a real possibility of us creating dual use in government locations. So we're pushing really hard on workplace charging for government employees.
So I think you mentioned trucks. Can you talk a little bit about how you're expanding beyond cars and trucks for?
Yeah, fleets are difficult because a fleet operator, his job is to get goods from point A to point B. His job is not to test new vehicles. So we're in the process of trying to identify the gaps that are in the market where there aren't sufficient vehicles to be able for plugging in for fleet vehicles and for trucks to make that happen. For example, there's work today being done to come out of the Port of Long Beach where the trucks coming out will be on a Canton area like a trolley bus and then leave at the end of that into the yard as an electric vehicle, so it'll be clean. And what's interesting about that is it's clean through about 7 different environmental justice communities, so it's an important deal. But let me give you one little quick story about electric vehicles and fleets. Frito-Lay built 30 battery electric trucks for delivering crackers and stuff they deliver. The drivers were the ones that were the most excited because they drove all day in a vehicle that didn't vibrate. So when they got home, they felt comfortable. They didn't smell like diesel fuel. And they also became part of the professional sales team because when they pulled up in front of a 7-Eleven, they were being asked, what about your truck? Tell me about your truck. So there's more to it than just giving you cleaner air because you're driving the vehicle. It actually adds to the experience of the people driving those vehicles.
All right, time to switch again.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you. So if I blow the name of the next person, you'll have to excuse me because his last name is Swann. And his first name isn't Lynn Swann, which I thought of immediately because, showing how old I am, at the 14th Super Bowl, I saw his grandfather catch a pass to win a game. So I'm pleased to invite Ryan Swann out there.
My grandfather's cousin.
He looks just as fast too, doesn't he? So Ryan's with the GSA. So the GSA has a very diverse fleet, a very diverse group of customers.
Yes.
So tell us how you're beginning to evaluate the data that's needed for your customers to make a decision so that you can make those vehicles available.
Good question, Bob. I think traditionally we have had something called the Federal Fleet Report that kind of is an aggregation of all of the government's fleet. And so where we're moving towards is vehicle line item data, which is basically data at the granular level. That's going to allow agencies to not only compare and benchmark kind of where they're at with utilization with, take an E85 asset, for example. If you spend the extra money to get the E85 asset, but you're only putting 10% of E85 in it, then is there an opportunity for you to reduce your carbon footprint? Additionally, by looking at data at that granular level, you're actually able to run the economics around at what price point does it make sense to buy the EV versus the E85 in comparison to the newer gas assets that have better MPG, better efficiency. And so you kind of get this quadratic equation going of, hey, if I focus here a little there, I focus here on this side, then I can hit my 5% reduction easily. And so that's kind of where we're moving. We at GSA, both on the transactional side, so our federal fleet Office Motor Vehicle Management Group. They do an awesome job of trying to green the fleet. And then on the data side, we look at it from not only efficiency, but are we making the right policies, and are the policies that we have in place actually impacting the results that we want? And so that's kind of how we see it.
So how much time do you spend looking at the future, trying to think 10 years from now, like the post office was talking about, trying to think about, I got to buy all these vehicles in 10 years, there may be new technology around. How do you handle trying to work toward the future?
I think predictive analytics is kind of how you kind of do it. You can actually use data to kind of see utilization, where it spikes and for what reason. So whether you're the census and every 10 years you get a spike, those types of events you can actually see the trend that you're trending in actual analytics, and then based off of different initiatives, whether it's an executive order or some other initiative, how can we actually impact in the future? One of the things that our GSA Motor Vehicle is looking at is car sharing. They've done a number of car sharing programs, and also EV, how to track the actual data from telematics, from charging stations, and also from just utilization and fuel purchases, so that you can actually predict kind of where you're going. And then you have to couple that. It's all directional. You're not going to get it 100%, but you have to take that information, mesh it with the mission information. How is our mission changing at agency, transportation, or agriculture, or EPA? And use that information to make an informed decision on what assets that you want to buy in the future.
So as one who's dealing with data all the time and trying to make sure it goes from data into information that people can really understand, how do you take all these fancy words you just used and turn it into good quality information that somebody like me can understand?
That's a good question, Bob. I think a lot of people will ask, Ryan, what is data analytics? And if you kind of think about it like this, we're used to reports, like rows and columns, and you kind of create this report, and this is what the number is. That's basic reporting. Then you kind of move into metrics, which is the number high or low? Are we talking basketball scores, or are we talking golf scores, right? You start to get into
football scores.
Or football scores. We start to get into actually how do I stack up against agencies that look like me, act like me, and those types of things. And that's metrics. And then you kind of get into analytics, which is how do I impact the number? Do I want it to go up? Do I want it to go down? What do I need to do? The predictive analytics. And so what we're trying to do is move our CO operations, which are fleet, travel, a real property, is moved from just simple reporting through metrics all the way to analytics. And that is how you kind of think about it, because the buzzwords are, you hear business intelligence, you hear data analytics, you hear big data, you hear government 2.0, you hear all these buzzwords, but that's really the transition that we're trying to move people to.
Okay, I can see a relationship between my group of DOE and yours, trying to pull that data together and turn information.
Absolutely.
Is that data available publicly to all of these folks who might want to try to dig in and look at that?
So today, the OGP, the Office of Government-Wide Policy, releases the Federal Fleet Report, which has been put out, I don't know, about 13 years. This year we've been working to move to that asset level, at the actual vehicle level data, which would eventually be used for metrics and measures down the line. But that aggregation is available to the public right now.
Okay, so you have vehicle data, infrastructure data you're beginning to develop, cost of infrastructure,
absolutely,
cost of all that information.
One of the things that we're looking at between telematics and actually charging station is to say, okay, how from telematics, I can get how the asset is being used. I can get a number of things from the actual asset. So if you take a EV, for example, you can actually look at how it's being driven compared to how much charging needs to be done, and how that charging is being done. And then of the infrastructure, which charging stations are not being used, right? Which ones do you have an opportunity to maybe share with a brother or sister organization so that they don't have to actually stand up their own charging station? And so GSA, our Motor Vehicle Management Group, they do an awesome job of trying to green the fleet, helping to build some infrastructure where we can actually charge our EVs. And it gets, you kind of constantly are weighing the economics versus the environmental. We all know we need to do it. The question is, what's the best way with the finances that we have, so we don't have to, cut salaries and cut this and cut that. And so I think we have a number of opportunities with the improvement in technology, with the improvement in MPG in regards to the actual the gas assets, along with E85, along with CNG, along with EVs. You kind of can ultimately get there.
So earlier I mentioned operator satisfaction. Have you begun to think about how you can measure operator satisfaction?
Yeah, so we've been
being cool, be green, or whatever.
So we've been working on satisfaction. One of the things that we did with the President's Management Agenda on benchmarking this year was look at satisfaction as compared to your efficiency metrics. And so we didn't look at the fleet this year, but we did something similar in real property acquisition, IT, HR, and financial management. And so one of the things that we're looking at doing is expanding that out to travel and fleet, to say, okay, how do we take our actual satisfaction and link it to our efficiency metrics? So that's something we're looking at. So.
I'm sure all of you understand everything you said. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. I think we're done.